Hey Marge, did you know that in 2009 we got new credit laws in Australia called the National Consumer Credit Protection Act 2009? That's when the Australian Securities and Investments Commission, whose abilities were already being questioned after the global financial crisis, became the boss of Australian consumer credit laws. Hold that thought, Marge. This will make sense eventually. Now, if you are lucky enough to be one of many young people who were lent the cost of an education by politicians who got their own education for effing free, then you might be privileged enough to have a thing called a HECS Debt. Recently, the HECS has been renamed HELP, just for helping all of those universities clean up for so long. But whatever it's called, HECS loans still need to be paid back. Or do they? Now that I think about it, the government is using partial HECS debt forgiveness as a campaign promise. So who in their right mind would pay it off early, knowing that some future government wants to dangle this debt forgiveness like an effing carrot? Or you could always just kick the bucket and they'll forgive it then. How generous. But I digress, Marge, which is highly unusual. Anyway, now if I was a credit provider and I wanted to lend someone some money, I would have to comply with the National Consumer Credit Protection Act. It's that simple. And then the Australian Securities and Investments Commission could make me submit to all kinds of probes if they wanted to. Now I sense those probes have piqued your interest, Marge, which is understandable, because this is where things get extremely interesting. Now I'm paraphrasing here because I can't do 6 things at once. But 1. If a borrower is a natural person, and 2. The purpose of the loan is personal, and 3. There is a charge for the credit, which I argue that the CPI is, and 4. The lender is in the business of providing credit, which I say the Australian government is in this case. Then why aren't HECS debts regulated credit contracts with all of the same freaking safeguards? In other words, Marge, why don't you have to qualify for a freaking HECS debt? Because now we have a situation where ASIC makes you go through hundreds of hoops and demonstrate that you've had 3 jobs for the last 2 years just to prove you can afford a home loan, while at the same time they let the Australian government give you a credit contract in the form of a HECS debt when you don't even have a job, and half the time the HECS debt is the tipping point that stops you getting a freaking home loan. Well, luckily we have the Australian Financial Complaints Authority, and you'd think there is no way they would possibly abide the capitalizing of consumer debt, even just by the CPI, especially for someone who never even qualified for it in the effing first place. In fact, if any other lender did this, it would be regarded as predatory lending, or at least you'd think that, wouldn't you, Marge? But nope. The Australian Financial Complaints Authority are too busy sending out please explains to finance brokers or to credit providers who have had their branding appropriated by scammers. But you've let me digress again, Marge. Anyway, imagine you have a HECS debt and things are so bad you are living under a bridge. Well, unlike a regulated credit contract, there is no recourse for hardship. I repeat, Marge, no recourse for hardship. So in summary, Marge, in my extremely humble opinion, 1. HECS approvals by their very nature are predatory. 2. Natural justice is denied, because unlike every other lender, there is no avenue to apply for hardship due to exceptional circumstances. And 3. CPI adjustments are unfair, because they are increasing the debt much more than the original value. So there you have it, Marge, Australia's #1 predatory lender, the Australian government.